Imagination is routinely misclassified as an escape mechanism. It is treated by the modern world as a retreat from the tangible, a diversion into the fictional, or a tool for idle entertainment. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the human apparatus. Imagination is not a theater for making things up. It is an organ of perception. It is the primary mechanism by which we observe the field of uncollapsed potential before it hardens into the physical environment. When a person imagines, they are not generating illusions. They are extending their awareness into lighter, less rigid states of matter and pulling data backward into the present moment. Consider the physical world around you, the chair, the walls, the earth. This is reality at its most dense, its most restricted. It is bound by strict laws of physics, linear time, and decay. But everything that exists here began in a state of absolute fluidity. The process of creation is simply the act of moving information from a state of high fluidity to a state of extreme density. Creativity, therefore, is not a whimsical talent bestowed upon a lucky few. It is the deliberate application of pressure. It is the rigorous labor of taking a highly volatile, formless concept and forcing it through the narrow funnel of the human mind until it possesses enough weight to exist in physical space. To manifest anything, one must learn the syntax of physical reality. An idea in the mind is boundless. It requires no fuel, obeys no gravity, and meets no resistance. But to pull that idea into the waking world requires translation. The artist, the builder, the engineer, the thinker, they are all engaged in a process of translation. They are learning the rules of the dense environment and using those rules to anchor the abstract. This is why creativity is inherently fraught with frustration. The translation is never perfect. The raw, energetic impulse of an idea always loses a fraction of its purity when it is forced to conform to the laws of physical structure. The boundless concept must be cut down to fit into the constraints of language, paint, code, or steel. Yet, without this restriction, the idea remains a ghost. The friction between the boundless idea and the rigid world is what generates the heat of creation. It is the necessary sacrifice of infinite potential for the sake of actual concrete existence. This brings us to the function of dreams. Why does the human mind, when resting, immediately begin constructing elaborate, seemingly irrational environments? The waking world is heavy. It demands constant, exhausting vigilance to navigate its limitations and rules. When the physical body rests, the conscious mind detaches from this heavy sensory input. It floats back into the lighter, more fluid states of the field. A dream is the raw processing of potential. It is the mind interacting with data before it has been organized by the strict, local laws of time and space. In a dream, an object can be two things at once. A location can shift without physical transit. Time can loop, stretch, or collapse entirely. This is not the brain malfunctioning. This is the brain functioning in an environment with entirely different physical laws. We dream because the human system requires a sandbox where the rules of density do not apply. It is a necessary and profound recalibration. In the waking world, we are constantly collapsing probability into a single concrete reality just to walk down a hallway. In the dream state, we reverse the process. We uncollapse reality back into pure probability. This prevents the human apparatus from becoming overly rigid. It reminds the subconscious of the infinite variations that exist just behind the heavy curtain of the physical world. To understand this is to recognize that you are not a passive observer of the universe, wandering through a pre-constructed set. You are an active participant in its continual construction. The act of creation is the most natural, necessary function of the human organism. To deny your own creativity is to deny your primary utility. We are the mechanism by which the universe organizes itself into new, increasingly complex forms. Do not treat your imagination as a repository for idle fantasies. Treat it as a workshop. When you experience a vision, a sudden understanding, or a compelling idea, you are perceiving raw material that has not yet been processed. It is waiting for a conductor. It requires someone to stand firmly in the current moment, grab hold of that raw potential, and apply the labor necessary to make it dense. This requires a ruthless kind of focus. The modern environment is designed to scatter attention, to feed the mind an endless stream of prepackaged, fully dense realities created by others. Consuming the creations of others is easy because the labor of translation has already been done. But consuming does not fulfill the deeper human imperative to build. To be a creator, you must be willing to endure the severe discomfort of the blank page, the empty room, the silent moment. You must be willing to sit with the unformed and wrestle it into shape. This is the manifesto for the conscious mind. Refuse the passive state. Acknowledge that every action, every word, every intentional thought alters the structure of the space around you. You are constantly generating reality, whether you do it with intention or by default. The difference between the architect and the sleepwalker is merely a matter of conscious application. Let us examine the exact point of translation. The fulcrum of all creation is the immediate present. The past is already dense. It has been written, it has cooled, and it cannot be reshaped. The future is entirely fluid. It is a chaotic storm of variables and probabilities. The only point where you possess actual leverage is the exact fraction of a second where the fluid future hits the rigid past. This is the present moment. This is where the hammer strikes the anvil. When you create, you are standing at this exact intersection. You pull a concept from the fluid future, you hold it in the present, and you apply action, whether it is the stroke of a pen, the speaking of a word, or the physical labor of building. In doing so, you force that fluid concept to harden into the past. It is now part of the physical record. It has density. This is why true creativity requires absolute presence. If your mind is projecting into the future, worrying about the outcome or the reception of your work, you are not at the fulcrum. If your mind is dwelling in the past, analyzing previous failures or established conventions, you are not at the fulcrum. The translation can only happen when the entirety of your focus is locked onto the immediate point of contact between thought and action. It is a state of intense, hyper-focused neutrality. You are not judging the work. You are merely conducting it. Consider the nature of resistance in this process. When you attempt to bring a new concept into the physical environment, you will inevitably encounter friction. This is not a personal failure, nor is it a sign that the idea is flawed. Resistance is simply a property of density. The physical world is already occupied. It is filled with existing structures, established routines, and the collective agreements of billions of other conscious entities. To introduce something entirely new into this space requires displacing what is already there. This displacement requires energy. When you feel the overwhelming urge to abandon a project, when you experience the heavy lethargy of self-doubt, or when the physical world seems to throw endless logistical obstacles in your path, you are experiencing the friction of the dense world pushing back against the fluid idea. The existing reality does not want to change. It is inherently conservative. It requires less energy for the universe to maintain its current state than to integrate a new variable. Your role as a creator is to supply the necessary energy to overcome this inertia. This is where the concept of will becomes paramount. Will is not mere stubbornness. It is the sustained application of focus over time. It is the refusal to let the fluid idea evaporate back into the unmanifested field. You must hold the structure of the idea in your mind with such clarity and intensity that the physical world has no choice but to warp around it and accommodate its existence. This mechanism explains why so many profound ideas never see the light of day. It is not for a lack of imagination. It is for a lack of sustained will. The creator perceives the idea, feels the initial rush of its potential, but retreats as soon as they encounter the harsh, unyielding resistance of the physical translation process. They drop the hammer. They step away from the anvil. The idea, no longer held in place by conscious focus, dissolves back into the ether. To be a true architect of reality, you must learn to love the resistance. You must recognize the friction not as an enemy, but as the very surface against which you are grinding your concept into a sharp, definitive reality. The heavier the resistance, the more profound the impact of the final manifestation will be. We make art, we invent, we build not simply for utility or decoration, but because the act of bringing something across that threshold is the only way to prove we are alive. A machine can replicate. A system can maintain. Only a conscious entity can reach into the dark, grasp something that does not yet exist, and drag it into the light. We must discard the romanticized notions of the tortured artist or the divine muse. These concepts are outdated masks for a much more mechanical, fundamental truth. The field of unmanifested reality does not select special individuals to bestow inspiration upon. The field is neutral. It is simply there, thick with potential energy, waiting for any consciousness organized enough to perceive it. Inspiration is not a gift. It is a successful tuning of the receiver. Therefore, the cultivation of imagination is not a matter of waiting for an idea to strike. It is a matter of refining your internal architecture. It involves clearing the static of anxiety, distraction, and biological fatigue so that you can clearly perceive the subtle signals of the unformed. It requires discipline. The act of sitting down to work, even when the mind feels empty, is the act of calibrating your instruments. You are signaling to your deepest faculties that you are ready to receive and translate. Do not apologize for the time you spend in your own mind, the staring out the window, the quiet moments of deep reflection, the periods of seemingly unproductive silence. These are not a waste of the physical clock. This is the gathering of material. This is the surveyor measuring the land before the foundation is poured. Honor the silence. Guard it fiercely. The noise of the external world is heavy and demanding, but the subtle reality from which all new things emerge is quiet. It requires your total attention to hear it. Your imagination is the blueprint. Your focus is the builder. The present moment is the only material you have to work with. Stop consuming the discarded manifestations of others and begin the rigorous, vital work of constructing your own. The architecture of tomorrow depends entirely on what you are willing to pull through the threshold today.